Right, let me tell you about my bike. It is a 2012 Honda NC700X. I've had it just over a year. I bought it for commuting, which is what I'm doing now. I'm just riding home, and it is looking excellent. It's better than this barrier anyway. Thank you. Yeah, it's a bike I did a bit of research on, quite a lot of research in fact, before I bought it. I wanted something that could do very good miles to the gallon, and that's about it. That was kind of my main consideration, because I do about 650 miles a week, so I wanted something that was really good on fuel, and yeah, I mean this certainly fit the bill. I'm really impressed with it. I think good points I'll probably start with first, briefly. The first thing is that economy. You know, I think they claim 78 miles to the gallon for it, and I can certainly get mid-70s, and if I try I can get 80. So and you know, most of the time if it's the 60 I'm doing between 60 and sort of 70ish. If it's a motorway I tend to stick round about the speed limit, give or take a few mile an hour. Probably I tend not to go over 80 on this sort of bike, because for one I'm going to work and back, so all I'm doing is like burning fuel, and it's not really any more fun at 80 than it is at 70, in all honesty. So that's the sort of number one good point if you're considering this sort of bike. It is as good as they say on fuel. The second thing, which is probably another real big plus for this bike, I mean, I've got another bike, I've got a Ducati Multistrada 1200S, lovely bike, but it doesn't have a frunk, and this has got a frunk, which is this fuel, what do I call it, the front trunk. So where the fuel tank would normally be on a bike, on a sort of conventional bike, you've got this storage area. I think on the 700 it's something like 21 litres, and on the 750, this is a 700, on the 750 it's I think a litre more, I think 22 or 22 and 23, something like that. But either way, the sort of the hook is that it can fit a full face helmet, which it can. I mean, I fitted mine in, and I usually wear an L to an XL, sort of about 60-61, so I've got a big long head like a bloody time trial helmet, so I tend to fit Shoeis. I'm actually wearing a Scorpion now, but my Shoei and my Shark will fit in, but I've never tried my my system helmets, you know, my flip fronts, because I've got a few. I'm a bit of a kit geek, as well as a bike one. I do like to collect helmets. I don't mean to, I just sort of see one and go, oh that's nice, and next thing you know I've got a sort of line of them, and not sure which one to wear, and I generally end up wearing the flip front helmet just because they're sort of a bit more convenient, and I work on an RAF base, so it's sort of easier when you go up to the gate. You can just flip it up and go, hello, yes that is me, and you know, you don't have to mess around taking your helmet off and that sort of stuff. So anyway, yeah, that the accessibility of this front trunk is just amazing. I tend not to actually use it for putting a helmet in, because wherever I'm going I just sort of take it with me anyway, my helmet, and I tend to leave my top box fitted on the back, so if I really want to store my helmet I tend to just leave it in that, because this front trunk is filled up with it's got I think 2 or 3 pairs of gloves, some over gloves, a puncture repair kit, you know, one of the ones with the carbon dioxide canisters. It's got one of them high capacity battery chargers that can charge your phone like 1,000,000 times, but also it's big enough and meaty enough that it's got 2 crop clip attached to it, well, a cable that you plug in, and you can plug that onto a battery and start your car or bike. It said it will start up any vehicle up to 2 litres, a 2-litre diesel, so you know, obviously quite a high torque. And I tried it, one of the people at work, they broke down, I hooked it all up and it worked, so you know, I'm pretty chuffed with that. The reason I got it and I leave it on this bike is because I've got the DCT dual clutch transmission fitted on this model. I bought the bike last year, but it was a few years old, so I didn't buy it with the DCT from the factory, because I think it's quite a lot more money. But when you're on the second-hand market, there's not really much difference. So the DCT intrigued me, and I thought it was a really good thing for an engine of this type, such a low revving sort of engine. So I went for the DCT, and I'm really glad I did. You know, it's really cool. But the downside of that, and there are a few downsides on the DCT, which I'll sort of come to in a while. But the main downside, that if your battery runs down, if your battery just gives up, and you know, I've had that happen on motorbikes before, and Hondas particularly, they always, not always, but a lot of them seem to suffer with the old regulator rectifier issue. I had a Fireblade, and I think I had it for 8 years, and in that time it went about 3 times the regulator rectifier in the battery and stuff like that. So they're notoriously iffy for electrical system failures, you know. I didn't know what the NC was going to be like, but then I thought, well, a normal bike, you can sort of get home, you can push it and just get it started, and you know, as long as you're not heavy with all the lights and you know, all the accessories, you might just get home. Whereas you can't push start a DCT bike, because you can only put it in gear once the engine's running, because other than that it's always in neutral. So that was a real thing to me. I thought, you know, I don't want to be stuck in the middle of nowhere without being able to start my bike. So if I just leave my lights on or something, well, you can't actually leave the lights on, but if your battery runs down for whatever reason, yeah, it's not something that I want to be saddled with, to have to call the AA just for a flat battery. So and I like having it in there, because when we go on our bike trips, you know, with my mates, if I can help them out, that's pretty cool as well. I try and encourage them to bring some stuff as well. Obviously I've got the puncture repair kit and this, and you know, if they could bring along some beer and a first aid kit, it's always handy if you break down. So yeah, that's the 2 best things about this bike, the economy and that front trunk. It's the weight's really nice and low down, so it handles quite well. It's not fast. I could say that's a downside, but that's just a characteristic of this engine. It's a Honda Jazz engine, for those that don't know. So the car, I think they call it something else in the States, but in the UK it's called Honda Jazz, or a Jizz. And it's a 1.4, I think they do a few different engines, but the 1.4 is the engine they got here, and they basically sliced it down the middle and made a 700 parallel twin out of it. And it's the strangest feeling to when you first ride it. In fact, when I first rode it, I was surprised how it picked up, because it's this DCT. See, there you go, I'm flat out there, so it's not particularly powerful, but I mean, that's 70, you know, just zipping past traffic, so it does the biz. It's quite alright. But when you first pull away, it's like a scooter in the way it behaves. So as soon as you put it in drive, which you do over here on this little switch, you just turn the throttle and away it goes. And the good thing about it is, I think 60 is about 4.5 seconds, so not particularly quick, but it'll be 4.5 seconds every time. Now, you know, I've had a Hayabusa, all these other bikes, I won't do a big list, but you could launch the booster and I don't know, 60, you could get it under 3 seconds, but you could also really fuck it up and and either stall it or almost sort of burn out and wheelie at the same time. And the same with the Fireblade, and the same with the RSV Factory Aprilia. And you know, this, you just put it in drive, all your mates are there kind of leaning forward and trying to get the right revs. You just go like that, you just kind of gun the throttle and off it goes. And it does surprise some people, you know, including me, even when I'm riding it. So the first time I rode it, I got on, it was on a slight hill. I'm starting to make excuses there, but it was on a hill and it went round to the right out of this person's drive quite steeply, and I just sort of got on, pressed it in drive and gently turned it, and it went right across the road. And I managed to turn, I didn't fall off or anything, but yeah, it really did take me by surprise. So, and it takes everyone by surprise. I took it for an MOT the other week, and the guy, he basically was stood out there for a little while. Excellent. He was stood out there for a little while, and then I realised that he didn't know what to do, because you know, it's a bit weird because there's no clutch lever, no gear lever. He was sort of just stood there looking at it. He was sat on the bike, and then I thought, hang on a minute, he don't know what he's doing, bless him. So I legged it out there. I said, "You're all right," and he's like, "How'd you make it go?" So it is one of them kind of things. And I said, "You should put it in D," and I said, "Be careful." And this guy had a S1000, not a double, S1000i, you know, the one like an S1000RR, but without the fairing and that. So a real powerful machine, you know, quick bike. But as soon as he pulled away on the throttle, he was like, "Fucking hell!" It really made him jump. I said, "Yeah, it's surprisingly potent from a standstill." This bit's always a pain in the arse. I'm in Grantham, the beautiful city of Grantham. I use the term loosely. I'm not sure actually if it is a city. I might be over-egging it there. Can I get in there? Yeah, beauty. Won't get through the middle though. I'll just sit here, I think. Ah, mate, he's going left. That's even better. So yeah, I think Grantham's famous for Maggie Thatcher was born here. Other than that, I couldn't tell you much about it other than I go through it to get home. But yeah, that's the good stuff done with, really. I mean, I've got a million accessories. This thing's like Trigger's broom, but I love the bike, you know. I've got, like I say, a Ducati, and I use that for playing, but this is my workhorse. But I had a Honda Blackbird for a couple of years, and that was always like, I was going to take that on trips, you know, me and the lads, and because I'd had a Hayabusa and these other bikes, and my mates, when I had the Busa, they had a Blackbird, and I always thought the Blackbird was a better bike. Obviously I never said it, I said it was a piece of crap, and but then when they got rid of theirs and got something else, I was like, I'm getting a Blackbird. So I got one, and we went on a Belgium trip actually, just three of us, and then a couple of years later I got some interest from the other lads, and they said, "Oh, can we come along to Belgium?" And rather than Bruges, this time we went to Ghent, and I just decided, you know, I've got this Blackbird that can eat up the miles. But the guys I was going with, one of them was on a GS, one was on like an MT-07. They weren't bikes that were that good at speed, you know. So as soon as they got to about 80 miles an hour, they were like hanging on. I mean, not so much on the GS, but certainly on the MT and, you know, the other naked bikes. They want to sit at 80, 85, even on the sort of big long motorways, which on a Honda Blackbird, for those who've tried it, is really, really boring. And, you know, I just thought, if we're going to Ghent, it's you just straight across the Eurotunnel, a couple of hours away from there, if that. Not particularly fast roads, not exciting roads. You just want a bike that's going to eat the miles up and be really good on fuel and that sort of stuff, and practical, obviously, like this baby. So I just, instead of riding the Blackbird, I actually took this, and I got him quite a lot of stick for it, because the guys were like, "What the fuck are you doing bringing a scooter?" You know. So but I sort of had the last laugh, because although it's all sort of accessoried up, farkled up as they say in America, I had a really good time on it, and I sort of put loads of stuff on it to make it more sort of touring. I've got the big top box on the back, and obviously having the built-in the front gear is really good. But the main thing was that whenever we were filling up, if them guys were putting in like 20 quid, I was putting in 10 or 11. You know, it was almost half the cost on the same ride and exactly the same speed that we're all going, you know. So I think they all came away pretty impressed with it, and, you know, I did. But then I'd been riding it for a few months anyway, so I knew what it was capable of. It can sit at the motorway at 80, 85, something like that. Any faster, I wouldn't recommend going like 90, 95. You can do it, don't get me wrong. It'll do about 110, that's about it. So, you know, you can imagine a bike that's capable of doing 110 isn't that comfortable at 90 or 95, because you're, you know, quite high up the rev range compared to, you know, its Redline, which is only 6,500. But, you know, at 90, 95, you're up in the fives, so you've only got like 1,000 revs to play with, which, you know, is not really what it's designed to do. If you imagine a little Honda Jazz, them things ain't designed to be ragged around at, you know, 5,000 revs. So I tend to treat this the way it was designed, you know, try and keep the revs nice and low, you know. But I mean, I can't tell. I'll go on to the sort of negative points now, really, and there really aren't many. And in fact, I'm going now. And there really aren't many, but the only ones I can think of, sort of little drawbacks, I'd call them, really, rather than negative points. The main ones all come from the system, the DCT system. I would rather have the DCT system not have one, don't get me wrong, because I think with the with this engine and a manual gearbox, I think I'd be hitting the rev limit all the time, which I know a lot of people do because of the, you know, the very small power band that you've got. So you just be constantly bang, bang, bang up and down the gears, and when you're commuting, which You know, I do 650 miles a week, roughly 130, 140 miles a day, Monday to Friday. So it's not something I want to be messing about with, changing up and down the gears every 2 minutes or every 2 seconds even. So yeah, the DCT to me is fantastic, but it has got some downsides, you know. I think the main one for commuting, especially in this country where we can do filtering, which obviously in the States they call lane splitting, when you ride through 2 lanes or 3 lanes of stationary traffic, you can't rev the bike, and I like to give it a little rev when I go through, just enough, you know, to just to keep it to keep people on their toes, you know, so they look, think, well, what's that, you know, they have a look in the mirror and go, oh, so some prick on the bike with loads of lights on the front. I've got an LED headlight and 2 very bright lights that are on my engine bars that I fitted. So I've got these 3 sort of bright LED headlights on this bike, but you know, that's almost to make up for the fact that it's you don't hear it coming through the traffic. I put an Akrapovic or a Fakrapovic as the boys call it, because it's like one of them Alibaba Express ones. I think it was about 30 or 40 quid, so $40–50. I thought, you know what, I'll take this bloody, the original exhaust is huge, it weighs like about 10 k's, and the replacement's just like a little, it says it's titanium, but I doubt it very much. It's more like it feels like the quality of like a bean can, but the Akrapovic sort of symbols kind of laser etched on, and it looks, you know, not unlike the original, to be honest. Yeah, the quality isn't as good as the rivets and that, but you know, it's probably like 5% of the cost. I think, you know, an Akrapovic, no one can say it properly. I think it is actually a Krapovic, but that just doesn't sound as good to me. Yeah, you can. I don't know if you can hear the engine there. It sounds nice. It sounds quite fruity, but I keep the baffle in because I've got neighbours, and when I leave at sort of 5:15 or whatever in the morning, it's a bit. It would be very antisocial if I was just to start it up at that time in the morning. You know, it's not really cool, I don't think. So I tend not to do that. So at least got the baffle in. I don't mind a little fruity noise, but I think you know, deafening people at 5:15 is not really cool if you're trying to stay good with your neighbours. You know, I think if I lived in the middle of nowhere, maybe I would. But to be honest, when I took it to Ghent, it did get a bit tiresome in town when you were kind of accelerating. You get a little bit too much vibrations off the exhaust, reverbing off every building you could went past. So that is one of the sort of downsides of a DCT, and the only other one really that I can think of, which is quite a, you know, consideration, is if it was your only bike, when you sort of get into spirited riding, as they say. I mean, it is cheap suspension, and that it's quite budget suspension, not really adjustable. The brakes aren't great. It's a single side disc on the front and obviously on the back, but it's linked and it's got ABS, so safety wise it's pretty good, but actual stopping distance, you know, you're not going to be doing any endos on it, that's for sure. But the link brakes are pretty cool. When I took it to the MOT test centre, actually I always thought linked brakes were linked both ways, but actually on this and on my Blackbird, the guy tested it on the rolling road, you know, on the brake tester. When you press the front brakes, I thought it also activated the back brakes, but it doesn't work that way around. It only works if you hit the back brake, it also does the front brake. So I just tried it then, which I was surprised at actually, but that makes it really good in town, because in town when you're sort of weaving through the traffic, it's much easier covering that back brake, I find, and then you can just sort of dab it on and off, and you can do a bit of trail braking and that. Obviously the only thing trail braking, if you're just dragging the rear into a corner, would be that you're also activating the front brake, which, you know, that's why racer types don't like combined brakes. I think because they fitted them on my Blackbird, and I believe they had them on a couple of the iterations of the Fireblade, and that was when it really came to the fore that people didn't like it, because, you know, they're made for a different audience. They're made for caning, you know, on the track and that sort of stuff, and fast road applications. You don't really want to be having you don't really want to be hitting the front brake when you're sort of trail braking going into a corner. So yeah, I think the bike was sort of standing up and that sort of thing on people, and they were having them de-linked and that sort of stuff. Anyway, yeah, that's one of the things. It has got budget components, but yeah, the main thing about this DCT gearbox, sorry, going back to that, when you go into a corner, at the moment we're sitting in sixth gear, which is fine, 48 mile an hour. You know, we're just in a steady line of traffic. I could whiz past, but you know what, I'm just chilling tonight, just on my way home. A lot of traffic. If I overtake these lot, there's going to be more people in front of them. Can't really be bothered to do that today. So I'm just quite happy to just sit here lounging and just relaxing. But anyway, when you go into a corner, you know, it's up to you. You can quickly whack it down. If I just do it, you can, don't know if you can see that, I'm just hitting down gears and then back up that way. Or I can switch it to manual over here. I can just press that to manual and then use the gears up and down. Now that's cool, but most of the time this bike DCT is designed for leaving it in automatic. I've got it set in D. I don't know if you can see that on the dash. Where my right thumb here is, I can select it from neutral, which obviously I'm not going to do now. But when you're on the go, you just press it again and it'll go into sport, and you can probably hear it knock down the gears and shift the revs up. Basically it just makes it a little bit more sporty. So if I was to open it up now, it jumps forward a bit more, it's a bit more eager, and it will hold the gear a lot more, a lot longer than it would in drive. When you're in the normal drive, that's like eco mode. And I know the 750, the later ones, there was a few improvements, and one of them was they added a few modes. But from what the guys were saying on the forums who have upgraded, you know, they said, well, you know, unless if you get the choice of getting that or that, then you know, get the later one. But otherwise, it's not really a big deal, to be honest. I think there's a few sport modes and a couple of drive modes, and I think they might have added traction control, but I don't quote me on that. But I think that was, someone mentioned it, but they might be wrong. Personally, I can't see the point of traction control on this bike. I would say it's probably one of the least bikes that needs traction control. I'm going to go past here because we've got a nice thick bit of tarmac. He moved over for me as well, so might as well make the effort. So yeah, if you're looking at one of these bikes, I would definitely recommend one for commuting. You know, and if it's your only bike, consider maybe the manual if you're thinking of a new one, because I think you just you maybe have more fun on it, and it wouldn't give you extra gears. That's what I was sort of alluding to earlier, that it keeps giving you gears when you don't always want them. So if you went into a hairpin, it would, if you wanted to go in, say, at first or second gear, probably first if it's a hairpin, it always wants to keep giving you more gears, so it'd be like, here's third, go on mate, have fourth, and it's not really much fun because you'd have to keep overriding it all the time, which you can do, but a lot of people don't like that lack of control. I certainly don't when I'm trying to make a bit of progress, which isn't very often on this machine, to be honest. I mean, I've been riding for nearly 30 years, so if I want to go quicker and get past the traffic, I can do that, but this isn't a bike really for getting right on it, to be honest, because you'll soon find the limits of the suspension and the brakes, and you don't really get rewarded massively for it. It's not that kind of bike. I've had fun on it, don't get me wrong, but you ain't going to, you're not going to be sliding about, and if you are, you're probably shortly going to be hitting the deck, because it's not that kind of bike. The suspension and the gearbox and the engine and everything is just not geared up for fast riding, really, especially when it's got 110 mile an hour sort of top speed. So anyway, I hope that gives you sort of an insight. If you've got any questions, feel free to add them in the comments, and take care. Cheers.